welcome back to State and Local. I'm so glad you're with me this evening because we have a big show. We have a two-part show with a lot of information. So we're going to go right to, I'm going to go right to my guest. My guest is Patrick Touhey, who is, if I may say, sort of a bit of a self-styled expert on Common Core. So we're going to be talking about this reform movement that has just blossomed in the United States that a lot of people are unaware of, and the people who are aware of it, many of them are not very pleased about it. So I wanted to thank you for coming on, Patrick, because I know that this should be very interesting. And what I'd like to know is, how did you originally get so interested in this, and how did you learn so much about it?
Well, back in 2009, 2010, I heard, watching on one of the many talking head shows, that Common Core would be a new educational initiative that would be started from a race to the top through the stimulus package. Right. And I really didn't give it much thought because I knew Massachusetts pretty much had the highest standards in the country, and we had a really good education system, and it was being boasted about. So I didn't give it much thought. And then in 2013, or actually late 2012, my daughter was having a tough time with her arithmetic homework, and my wife usually handles that. And she called me up because she couldn't get through it, and I started reading it. I was going, what is this? And it was a simple mathematical problem that they had where they had to draw circles and squares and count them up and use addition. And
I've seen that.
And it was very convoluted at the time.
Very convoluted.
Very convoluted. At the time she was in 5th grade, and she was pretty good at foundational mathematics. My wife did a lot of home teaching her. I mean, she was very good in the early grades. Before they went to this new Common Core material, I guess. And I mean, in the 1st, 2nd grade, she was fine. Like I said, my wife did a lot of flashcard work with her. So I started looking at it, and then I just started looking at it. It wasn't a workbook. It was a sheet. It was a worksheet. She didn't have a book. There was a copied sheet she brought home, but it did say it was Common Core Aligned. I go, Common Core Aligned. So I started doing some investigation, a little bit here and there when I could, and then I did find a set of videos that I found that the state of Georgia was doing Common Core, and they had immersed themselves in it fully within 2010, 2011, where Massachusetts was probably going a little bit more slowly. And so this group of teachers and a group of activists in Georgia put together the series of videos. It's the first series of videos I watched.
Pro or con?
Oh, it was mostly con.
Uh-huh.
And they explained the history of Common Core, how it came to be, who developed it, how it was rushed into the schools without any benchmark testing, without any peer reviews. So that kind of alarmed me a little bit, because I know when Massachusetts went through its education reform of 1993, there was good 2-3 years of public input, debate,
yep.
Teacher input, professor input from colleges, even business input.
Which is only right.
Which is only right. There was a lot of debate. I remember the headlines back then, and it went through a lot of debate before it actually started to be implemented in 1998. So I was like, wow, this Common Core is in already. And then I started looking at the stuff. And then I found a group on Facebook at the time. I was kind of new to Facebook then, too. I found a group on Facebook. It was about Stop Common Core Massachusetts. And I started reading a lot of the posts. And there's a lot of articles that were being linked from specialists. And then I found the Pioneer Institute.
Yeah.
Which was Dr. Sandra Stotsky, who was one of the architects of the educational reform in the 90s for Massachusetts. And also I attended one of the forums that they were putting on. And I got a lot of good information. I started doing more homework, more reading. Started seeing a lot of complaints from a lot of other states, a lot of pushback, a lot of college professors that are starting to worry about the Common Core. So there was a lot of, and I wasn't seeing any of it in the media. That's what was troubling me most. I wasn't seeing any of this pushback in the media. Parents knew nothing about it.
Yes, sir.
I asked parents, I go, have you heard about this Common Core? They go, what is Common Core? And I go, well, I don't know. I'm trying to find out. I maybe notice new things in your child's mathematical homework or ELA homework. And I said, yes, we have. So, but they just took it, that's what it, the way it is. And so I did more research. I got connected with this group, and because
it's like a little coup d'etat in a way, and within the realm of education.
Yeah, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I only like to study facts. So this group, Stop Common Core Massachusetts, started another activist, a woman from a former school committee member from Worcester, Donna Calario, started this Common Core Forum, which
I
is what
think
I'm
I've met
involved in
her,
now.
yeah.
Yeah, was on Charlie Baker's transitional team for education when he was elected, and she knows a lot of people, and she's very smart. She's an adjunct professor at a college in Worcester, and I got together with this group. We started meeting. Gee, it's been over a year now. It's amazing. I've met some of the most wonderful people in this group. I mean, just mothers, parents.
Now, what's the name of that group again?
Common Core Forum, and you can get to see them by going to commoncoreforum.org.
Oh, yes, okay.
And commoncoreforum.org has a lot of resource links out there where you can see the videos of the over a dozen forums that we've put over the past year, and other videos from other forums from other states, from other educational experts, such as Dr. Duke Pester, and as well as Sandra Stosky, Jamie Gass, and Dr. Peg Legzik, who these people travel on their own dime or minimal expenses to go around and educate people on how Common Core came to be and what's really troubling about it, because and who's really behind it. The proponents of Common Core, such as the Department of Education, nationally and federally and local, say it was a state-led initiative that was written by teachers and it had plenty of input, which is not the case at all. It was commissioned by the National Governors Association and the Chief Superintendent Schools Association and Achieve Inc. Achieve Inc. is a nonprofit arm of Pearson Publishing. And together they wrote the standards in private, behind closed doors,
I tell you,
with no public input, with no public review. And they are the standards, as well as the park testing that's associated with it, is copywritten in private. It's not public domain.
well, this is what. Excuse me. This is why I was. To me, it's like what I meant by coup d'état was just exactly what you're talking about. It was just kind of developed in more or less in secret and then sprung.
Yes, and at the time, Sandra Stosky, who was very concerned about these standards, almost demanded to be put on the validation committee, as stated by her in her many forums. And I mean, she's an extremely wonderful woman, and University of Arkansas, emeritus, I can't even say that word right now. But
Emeritus.
Emeritus, thank you very much. I'm a little bit flustered right now. Emeritus, and I mean, she's an incredibly intelligent woman, and she knows she's an English language arts specialist. And she was very concerned about the ELA standards in Common Core. So she almost demanded to be on the validation committee when they were going through that in 2008. And she got also Dr. James Milgram, who's a mathematician expert out of Stanford University. He was extremely smart and has knows standards, written standards, knows them very well. And they got them on the validation committee, and they refused to sign off on the standards, because they found them to be very weak and inadequate compared to the standards we had in Massachusetts and all the mathematical standards that they had in California at the time, which were among the best. That in the state of Minnesota had one of the top mathematical standards at the time.
Now, where were these meetings held? Were they held individually within the states, or was this done in Washington?
This is done in Washington. I believe it was done in Washington.
Yeah.
Wherever Chief. It could have been done in Chicago as well, because a lot of the park, and that's
Probably
another
the DOE.
aspect. The assessment portion is another portion that's very troubling. And so when they declined to, they were one of, I guess there was 29 people or 28 people on the validation committee. They were one of 2 or 4 people that refused to validate. And they to this day, we don't know who the other people were on the validation committee, because they were required to sign a confidentiality agreement to not disclose anything in the validation minutes.
Well, this is what these people do. It's just like with the thing with Benghazi, that they told them they couldn't talk to anybody and they couldn't say anything. I mean, it's outrageous.
And it's something like this should be.
This is what they do.
That they should have went through a 5-year review, 3 to 5 year review, within public input from teachers and college professors, especially teaching colleges would have been nice. Yes, and there was no teachers. No teachers and no standards writers on the validation committee or within the standards writing committees. People who wrote the standards knew nothing about education. And the architect of the standards, David Coleman, never taught a day of class in a school anywhere. Okay?
Oh, no, they don't. I mean, I know from when I was teaching, I mean, the ones that they would go and maybe teach 1 or 2 years, then they would get their degree over at the Harvard School of Ed, and then they stayed out of the classroom. They didn't want to be, they didn't want to be a...
David Coleman, as well as Arnie Duncan, have never taught a day in any classroom ever. And, David Coleman, who is now president of the college boards, is realigning the SATs to Common Core.
Yes.
And the GED is now aligned to Common Core. So people who took normal education, what we call normal, if they want to take the GED now, they're not going to pass it. There's already been a 60% drop in passing rates in the GED since this came out last year. Yeah, the GED has already been realigned to Common Core.
So the GED is that
general education diploma.
In lieu of getting a diploma.
In lieu of getting a diploma from high school. So if you dropped out of high school and you want to get a GED to advance your education elsewhere or do something, it's going to hurt you. And David Coleman is quoted as saying, and this applies to the test, that teachers will teach to the test. There is no force on earth strong enough to stop that. He's quoted, they have him on videotape saying that.
That's what he wants, or
no,
that's what he
he's quoted as saying. He's quoted as saying, because out of the Common Core, in order to assess the Common Core standards, they had to come up with an assessment test, which, as we know, is PARC.
Right.
There were two testing consortiums, PARC and SBAC, Smarter Balance. And Massachusetts is one of the states that decided to go with PARC. Now, PARC originally had...
So was there a choice between the two?
Yeah, I'm not sure how they divided it up, to be honest with you. I know some states use SBAC, such as New Hampshire did, but Massachusetts...
But these are both tests.
These are both assessment tests that are privately owned and not public domain. They're again, copywritten. So
And so the schools pay for this, pay plenty for it, I bet.
Oh yeah, the school's they're gonna incur many costs. We can get to that in a little bit. Let's try to keep with the history of how it came to be. And after Pearson Publishing is one of the major publishing houses in the world. They're based in UK, and they're very well on board with this. They have donated to the Jeb Bush's Excellence in Education, as well as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's been reported that he's invested over $200 million. $200 million into the creation of a national standards. So Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has a big role in this when it comes to money.
Were they involved from the beginning?
Yeah, pretty much. They're the ones that kind of seeded it.
Well, you see, they gave money to the Boston Public Schools, so that just as an aside, to fund this idea that Harvard School of Ed had, that if you have small schools, this will be a nurturing environment. So they split up most of the high schools in the city of Boston.
Which hurt.
And it cost a fortune, and then it went back, and now it kind of all fizzled out. Yeah. But the parents knew nothing about it. There was nothing in the Herald, and there was nothing in the Globe.
No,
it was never discussed.
Public education, I'm finding as I do my research day after day, is becoming, it's more of a factory instead of an enlightening enrichment idea for children. It's become more of a factory to create...
Or to create independent thinkers.
No, they're not creating independent thinkers
anymore.
No. They're creating what they want to create as certain classes of workers, and that's what I see coming out of public schools right now. Because, right now, Bill and Melinda
Gates.
Yeah, well, Gates's kids don't take Common Core. They go to a private school that uses, it uses a total different curriculum, the older Montessori curriculums. And Steve Jobs and Apple refused. His kids went to a Waldorf school where they used no technology at all, and he wouldn't allow technology. Now this guy's, just before his passing, was the head guy at Apple.
Right.
Wouldn't allow technology in his house.
Huh.
No one had an iPad. No one.
Well,
had
it tells you something, doesn't it?
It tells you something that our little devices are not the greatest things we thought they were. I think they do corrupt. I see it in my own house where these little devices can corrupt the young mind. And people get it. You see it every day. You walk downtown, people are like this. So, and that's a choice we make. That's a choice we make. And as parents, we have to police that, and that's not up to anybody else. But you're up against it with the assault on media. But that's a choice that as parents we have to make, and we have to control that. We can't blame that on anybody else. But if we go back to the creation of the Common Core standards and how they were implemented, said they were implemented in the dark of night. Some states signed onto them sight unseen, just to get the money.
Now, let me just tell you. Now, the race to the top was an essay what was that exactly? I remember it was an essay contest, or was it how much they had improved, or?
Yeah, it was to get them all proficient on these assessment tests.
That was it. Yes.
Okay, so there was money awarded to certain states that did that. And now the money's gone, and we're stuck with the standards and the assessment test that came out of it. And I was going to go with this, the actual PARC assessment. There's another good book out there by a teacher by the name of Brad McQueen. He's out of Arizona. He was actually selected by the Arizona Department of Education to help them critique or review the park testing that was being created. This is in Chicago.
Now, just so people know, it's PARCC.
PARCC, Partnership and, oh God, I can't remember the acronym.
An assessment and
Assessment for Readiness for
Common
College and
Core,
Career.
the CC on the end.
Yeah, and spelled backwards, it's crap. So, pardon my levity.
Very good.
Well, that's the local joke on it. But Brad McQueen was selected because he was an award-winning teacher in Arizona. They selected him to go review the park creation when they were doing it in Chicago back in 2008, 2009. And when he got there, he was asking questions, and he was actually told not to ask questions, just to review. And he found that very troubling. He wrote a book called The Cult of Common Core. It's a 90-page book. It's $5. You can download it PDF, and it's an unbelievable read. And he pretty much exposes what their aim is to do with park. It's basically to collect information off the children.
That's the other thing, right? That's right.
The data collection.
Yeah.
See, park, Common
when they
Core,
fill out their test, or
well, when park and Common Core will be no good without the longitudinal data system that the government controls. So all this information, and which is backed up by private corporations as well, all this information, when you take the test, and day-to-day curriculum activities such as regular stuff, everything goes online. Right now, if you go to King Philip, my daughter uploads her homework online. All grades are recorded online. So all that information eventually, if not already, is fed into a longitudinal data system. And this will basically classify kids in certain areas based on their grades. And the other information that's based off the park test is, families' religious beliefs, who's employed, who's not employed, if they're divorced, if they're married, and all sorts of information that have nothing to do with education.
So do they fill that in on a questionnaire before they take the test?
Yeah, it's usually on a screen. Huh. Or it's done at other points, but it's done at other points, and that information, when they take the park test on computer, it asks certain information.
So unless the parents tell them, do not answer these questions, they're just going to naively...
They're going to naively do it. And the schools out there now, even in Massachusetts, I was reading yesterday that parents wish their children not to take the test. And the school said they wouldn't, but they did anyway.
They administered it. So that meant the kids had to leave the room, or...
They scared the kids into taking the test.
Oh, and
then they got home, they told their
parents... What towns were this? Do you know?
One was down the Cape, another one's out in Western Mass somewhere. I don't know the towns exactly, but I was reading.
Were there many where that happened?
There are schools out there that are not friendly to the parents when they request to opt out. There are schools out there that will do that. Either they have misinformation that it's required they take these tests, or they're flat out lying. And there are some out there that do that. Now, Norfolk didn't do park this year. Norfolk stick with MCAS. Okay, that's this year. King Philip Middle went with park. King Philip High went with MCAS for graduation requirement. Okay, so the middle,
which they had to do, right? They still have to take the MCAS.
It's still mandated to do the MCAS for graduation.
So they'd be testing all the time between the MCAS, which takes a lot of time, and then this other thing.
And there's a lot of people out there that think they should get rid of both tests. And I'm not all for standardized testing, but the one point I do make, MCAS is owned by the public, and it can be reviewed, it can be updated. And if the people are so inclined and would mass up together, and we could get, we could have it removed from the lexicon of the state. I mean, if we could get the legislators to move. And the other thing with Common Core and Park, it never went through a legislative process, so there was never any cost review done on it either. And the cost of implementing Common Core and Park over the years it's going to cost more and more money for the school districts, because the contracts they have with the software companies that have all these online programs, they're only 3 years long, so they have to be renewed every 3 years. And then the constant upgrades of technology is going to have to be renewed at least every other year, if not every year, because, as you know, if I work in the technology industry, nothing stays the same.
Right.
Everything is constantly updated. I mean, after 6 months, it's obsolete.
Does this mean they'd move away from books gradually?
They are moving away from books now. Most books now are online. They're using either Chromebooks or iPads, and the books are online, which doesn't bode well because those books can be edited very easily. I mean, with misinformation, without...
And let me ask you this, how do they know that it's your daughter's homework that's being uploaded?
Because everyone has an ID.
Even so, but I mean, if a kid wanted to cheat and had somebody else do it for them,
well,
there'd be no way. Whereas in the classroom, you know, the teacher could look and see what the answers are and how they compare and say, well, what...
They're taking the teachers out of it. And the teachers are starting to realize that in this state. In other states, they're a little bit more forceful about it, like in New Jersey just yesterday, the New Jersey Teachers Union put out a communication out to tell parents to opt out of the test. Now, the teachers' unions and the teachers might have different motives, and they could be the same as mine, but they might have different motives because within the park testing, not only is the student getting evaluated, the teachers are getting evaluated.
Oh, right. Well, that's the case with MCAS.
And overall, the schools are getting evaluated.
Isn't that the case with MCAS as well?
MCAS, no, they use that as a portion, but not the way Park is going to do it.
Yeah.
Park is going to evaluate the teachers, and they're going to base it on the scores of the children. And if it finds out that a lot of the kids within, and it's not going to take into account the sociology, you know, the economic area that the school might be in. So eventually all the poor schools are going to close. They're not going to get the resources because the kids, they might have issues at home that might not make them do well in school.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Believe me, I know about that.
When you take a test, as explained by some educational experts, when a kid takes a test, the person applying the test might not take into effect that Johnny, dog might have died last night, or his parents might be fighting, or there might be drug issues in the home, or there could be alcohol issues in the home. So they don't take that effect. So when they sit down to a test, they might have all this going on, so they might do poorly on the test. They might be a great student. They might be a very intelligent young person. But because they're not doing good on the test, maybe because they didn't study for it, or because there's a lot of things going on in the home environment, that test doesn't take into account to it.
And it's also what they bring into the classroom from the street or from the home. I mean, you can have a class that's fairly orderly, or you can have another one that there's one or two miscreants, I would call them, in my words, to rile everybody up.
Yeah.
And there's a tremendous amount of time that's wasted.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of time. In Norfolk, we don't have too much of that. I mean, I went to Boston Public Schools. I'm a product of...
I taught in the Boston Public Schools.
And then I went to Boston Technical, and it was in the late 70s. It was during the height of the integration issues, and it was a very tumultuous time in the schools.
Brighton, yeah. You were at Brighton High,
I
weren't
went to
you?
Boston Tech for 2 years, which was a test school. I took a test
Right.
to get in, and then I went to Brighton High for 2 years after that. But I saw the engineering going on then, and I really didn't acknowledge it then, but I acknowledge it now. I mean, when I was a freshman, there was a civics class. When I was a sophomore, it was gone.
That's another thing.
It was gone. It was gone.
I mean, now they don't know what goes on in Congress. They don't know what anything about the Constitution. They wouldn't even know about calling their state rep, let alone their congressman, if there's a problem, and how to avail themselves.
They are teaching a revisionist history with the Common Core line materials now, in a revisionist civics program, and I've seen it, and I've had to correct my daughter a few times. Well, that's not the way things work. I mean, there's a book out there, and I'm not sure. I know Pearson had to pull it back and come out with a new revision. It was in Florida. The history book talked about World War II, and it did not mention Adolf Hitler or the Holocaust.
Because what?
I don't know. It just didn't mention it, and
Didn't mention it.
Didn't mention it. The parents complained about it, and the Pearson had to pull it back and put out a new revision.
Didn't mention it at all.
Didn't mention Adolf, but it did mention the fact that we
did
dropped the
mention
bomb
World
on.
War II and.
Well, how do you not mention?
Right, but I mean.
Well, they're teaching a revisionist history, and it's very troubling. And they I've seen many examples where they put America in a bad light, Well, I
Right.
mean, I sent you. I think I sent you a version of I think it was second or third grade, where they taught about the Second Amendment, where
Yes, I saw that.
certain people are allowed to have guns only if they
Certain
register them.
guns, and certain guns,
And
too.
certain guns, which that's not the Second Amendment at all.
Well, it's wishful thinking, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
what they would like to see.
They're doing a little bit of mind bending as well as revisionist history.
And
I see that.
Listening to this, you see all the various implications. And you mentioned about creating workers, or finding out about people, or propaganda that's inserted,
Yes.
or creating ignorance by not neglecting.
Well,
to.
I mean, this has been going on for a while. Common Core is not a new iteration of that. I mean, coming out of Boston Public Schools, I had very little. Although I did have interest in politics at the time, I had very little knowledge of how the government worked. And I had to reteach myself. I mean, I've become a student of history over the past 20 years. I've read a lot of history books. I've read a lot of biographies on presidents. I've got leading right up to FDR. And I've read more than one of each to get different views of it. And it's amazing how much I did not learn in school.
I want to just go back for because we have just a few minutes. But I'm absolutely fascinated about this business of them excluding Hitler and the Nazi movement. I mean, were there Jewish groups that made a fuss about this?
Actually, I've been to a forum at a synagogue last year in Randolph where they cited examples of a lot of anti-Semitism in the books that are being published.
Well, of course, that's become a worldwide thing. When you look at in France, you look throughout Europe.
Well, this is in this country, and like I said,
mean,
Pearson
it's
Publishing
really
is a
appalling.
UK-based company. So the printing of the books and the editing of the books mostly take place.
And that's another thing. This
over there.
reminds me of when they outsourced to Canada, Michelle Obama's roommate or somebody that she knew who was a manager in that
quid pro
group
quo.
to make the websites that were a disaster. I mean, you mean to tell me they couldn't have left that to an American company where there'd be American people working? And now you're telling me this is out of the UK. It's appalling.
Well, Pearson Publishing has been busy buying. Remember, Pearson Publishing wasn't a publishing company up until the 80s. They were originally an old construction company, but they got into publishing, and they've been buying up small publishing companies in this country and in Canada over the past bunch of years, probably since like the turn of the century. They've been buying up companies and not changing their names. So there's a lot of publishing companies out there in Canada that have their original names, but they're a subsidiary of Pearson Publishing. So I could go on about Pearson Publishing, but I'd rather have people go out and do their own research on them, how who's invested in them, how they do their business, how they do their research.
Pearson.
PEARSON, and they're a UK company, and they have a big nut in this. They have a very big because they stand to make a lot of money.
I would imagine.
And also the National Chamber of Commerce is also very pro Common Core because they want to see workers come out, and they're very derogatory to us parents who are fighting this right now. So I'm not a big fan of the National Chamber.
Well, they don't want to be told no. A lot of these people, absolutely, they want to have the say, and that's.
As one radio guy who's pretty famous calls them the Chamber of Crony Capitalism, because and that's exactly what they are. They're the more and more I read about this, the more and more I look at this, the more and more I get disgusted in our government and what it's doing. And
we love our country, we hate the government.
Yeah, I'm getting even less and less confident in our local legislators because they're not doing a lot for it. I mean, there are 7 bills on the Hill right now to curb, stop, or get rid of Park and Common Core altogether, but they're not advancing very fast.
Well, next time, because you had a proposal that you wanted to make, we'll talk about next time here in town.
Yes, I do.
And so we're going to have to stop. But thank you so much. I mean, you're
welcome,
really a
Everett.
wealth of knowledge. My goodness.
I wish I could.
Fascinating.
I wish I could put it down on paper and convey it as well as other people do.
No, but you're very, it's perfectly understandable. So we're going to have a second show with Patrick Touhey to continue this conversation. So I hope you'll be watching that one as well. And we're going to start putting these shows in certain time slots. So hopefully maybe next time I can tell you when the shows will be on so you can watch both of them. But thank you so much for watching another episode of State and Local. I'm Anne Marie Battistone, and you're watching Norfolk public access.